The hospital never truly slept, but there was something different about 3 o'clock in the morning. The bright hallways became strangely quiet. The machines seemed louder than ever, and every exhausted worker carried invisible battles that no one else could see. That was the hour when most people wished they were home with their families. Yet one man willingly chose that lonely shift every single night. Everyone believed he was simply desperate for overtime. No one knew the heartbreaking truth hidden behind his tired smile, until one unforgettable night when the CEO unexpectedly walked through those silent corridors and witnessed something that changed not only one employee's life, but the future of an entire hospital forever. Before we continue, if you believe in kindness, second chances, and the power of ordinary people doing extraordinary things, please like this video, leave a comment, share it with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe to Heatworking, Dad, for more emotional stories that remind us humanity still exists. Every morning, just as the sun painted the city with warm golden light, Nolan Brooks quietly returned to his small apartment. While everyone else was beginning their day, his was ending. His 8-year-old son, Mason, was always waiting by the kitchen window with a sleepy smile, pretending he had not stayed awake just to see his father come home safely. Nolan never complained about the exhausting schedule. After losing his wife, Hannah, to a sudden illness 3 years earlier, life had become a constant balancing act. He was no longer simply a father. He had become both parents, the provider, the comforter, the cook, the teacher, and the protector. The night shift at Westbridge Medical Center paid a little more than the daytime hours, and that small difference was the only reason Mason could continue attending his neighborhood school and living in the apartment filled with memories of his mother. Most employees avoided the overnight cleaning and maintenance shift. It was physically demanding, emotionally draining, and often thankless. Nolan accepted every extra assignment without hesitation. While surgeons saved lives under bright operating lights, Nolan quietly made sure every hallway, patient room, waiting area, and emergency entrance remained spotless. He believed every patient deserved dignity, even if they never noticed the hands responsible for keeping their surroundings safe. His co-workers respected him, although few truly knew him. They often wondered why he never joined after work, breakfasts, or accepted invitations to social gatherings. The truth was simple. Every free minute belonged to Mason. Nolan hurried home each morning, prepared breakfast, packed school lunches, helped with homework, attended parent meetings whenever possible, and somehow found enough energy to smile through it all. Sleep became a luxury measured in short naps instead of peaceful nights. Money remained painfully tight. Unexpected medical bills from Hannah's final months had left behind debts that seemed impossible to erase. Some weeks Nolan skipped meals so Mason could enjoy fresh fruit or replace worn-out shoes. He never allowed his son to feel the weight of those sacrifices. Mason believed his father simply preferred toast instead of larger meals. Nolan never corrected him. One sunny afternoon after dropping Mason at school, Nolan noticed his son secretly placing half of his homemade sandwich into another student's backpack. The other child wore an oversized uniform and looked embarrassed to accept it. Nolan stood quietly behind a nearby tree, tears filling his eyes. Kindness had survived unimaginable loss and somehow found a home inside his little boy's heart. That single moment reminded him why every exhausting night mattered. Inside Westbridge Medical Center, another world existed beyond the public's view. Nurses rushed endlessly between rooms. Security officers remained alert. Ambulances arrived without warning. Cleaning crews erased traces of tragedy before sunrise. Nolan became known for doing far more than his job description required. If an elderly visitor looked confused, he guided them personally. If flowers tipped over in a waiting room, he arranged them again. If frightened children cried outside treatment rooms, he quietly offered coloring books left behind by volunteers. What Nolan never realized was that small acts of kindness rarely remained invisible forever. The hospital's CEO, Victoria Sterling, was respected across the healthcare industry for transforming struggling hospitals into award-winning medical centers. Yet most employees had never seen her in person. She preferred reviewing reports from executive offices, trusting department managers to oversee daily operations. Recently, however, anonymous letters had begun arriving on her desk. They praised one unnamed overnight employee whose compassion exceeded every expectation. Curious but unconvinced, Victoria decided to inspect the hospital personally without announcing her visit. On a calm summer night just after 3 in the morning, her black sedan quietly stopped outside the emergency entrance. She wore a simple business coat instead of formal executive clothing so she could move unnoticed through the building. Managers scrambled nervously after learning she had arrived without warning, but Victoria ignored prepared presentations. She wanted to see reality, not rehearsed perfection. As she walked through silent corridors, she expected to notice cleanliness reports, equipment inspections, and security procedures. Instead, she discovered something impossible to measure on paperwork. Near the pediatric waiting area sat Nolan beside a frightened little girl, whose mother had been rushed into emergency surgery. The child clutched a worn, stuffed rabbit and silently cried. Nolan knelt beside her, carefully folding paper into colorful animals using old appointment cards. Within minutes, tiny paper cranes, butterflies, and stars covered the bench beside her. The tears slowly disappeared as she smiled for the first time that night. Nolan never realized anyone was watching. Victoria continued walking. A few minutes later, she found Nolan carefully repairing an elderly man's broken wheelchair, footrest using maintenance tools he carried for emergencies. The repair technically belonged to another department. Yet Nolan refused to leave the man uncomfortable while waiting until morning. He tightened every screw as though fixing something for his own father. Again, Nolan never noticed the silent observer. Further down the hallway, Victoria paused one final time. She saw Nolan remove his own lunch container from his backpack. Instead of eating, he quietly handed it to a tired nursing student who admitted she had worked nearly 16 hours without a proper meal. Nolan smiled, drank water from the hallway fountain, and returned to polishing the floor as though nothing unusual had happened. Victoria remained speechless. None of those actions appeared on performance evaluations. No supervisor had instructed him to do them. There were no cameras nearby for recognition. Everything came naturally from a man whose own life remained painfully difficult. Curious, Victoria quietly reviewed Nolan's employment file before sunrise. What she discovered broke her heart. Perfect attendance for nearly 3 years, countless voluntary overtime shifts, excellent evaluations, no disciplinary history, no promotion requests, no salary complaints, no mention anywhere that he was raising his son alone after losing his wife. The following afternoon, Victoria visited the apartment building listed in Nolan's employee records. She did not enter immediately. Instead, she watched from across the street as Nolan patiently taught Mason how to ride a second-hand bicycle held together by mismatched parts. Every time the little boy fell, Nolan encouraged him with gentle patience instead of frustration. Eventually, Mason balanced on his own, laughing with pure joy beneath the bright afternoon sun. Nolan clapped louder than anyone, celebrating a victory most people would consider ordinary. Victoria suddenly understood something leadership seminars never taught. Great organizations were not built only by talented executives. They were built by ordinary people who quietly chose kindness every single day. The next Monday, every department manager received an unexpected invitation to a company-wide meeting. Employees wondered whether budget cuts or policy changes were coming. Instead, Victoria walked onto the stage carrying only a small folder. She began speaking about unseen heroes. She explained that hospitals relied not only on surgeons, physicians, and administrators, but also on cleaners, cafeteria workers, security officers, maintenance teams, receptionists, and every person who cared enough to help someone else without expecting applause. Then she called Nolan Brooks onto the stage. The room filled with confused whispers. Nolan believed he had accidentally broken some policy. Nervously, he stepped forward wearing his ordinary work uniform. Victoria revealed everything she had witnessed during her surprise overnight visit. Silence spread across the auditorium. Several nurses began wiping away tears. Maintenance workers stood proudly. Even senior doctors lowered their heads with respect. Victoria announced the creation of the Hannah Brooks Compassion Award, named after Nolan's late wife after learning how her memory inspired his daily acts of kindness. The award would honor employees who served, others with exceptional humanity rather than job titles alone. But she was not finished. Victoria also announced Nolan's promotion to Patient Experience Coordinator, a newly created daytime position with significantly higher pay, flexible hours, leadership responsibilities, and educational opportunities. Most importantly, He would finally spend evenings with Mason instead of saying goodbye each sunset. Nolan stood frozen. For years he had believed no one noticed. He had been completely wrong. The weeks that followed transformed more than one family's future. Inspired by Nolan's example, employees across every department began looking for quiet, opportunities to help one another. Staff members organized food collections for struggling families. Volunteer tutoring programs supported employees' children. Mental wellness resources expanded. The hospital slowly became known, not only for excellent medical care, but for extraordinary compassion. At home, life also changed. Nolan attended Mason's baseball games beneath warm blue skies instead of sleeping through them after overnight shifts. Together, they cooked dinner, planted flowers in memory of Hannah, and watched sunsets from their apartment balcony. For the first time in years, Mason no longer waited beside the kitchen window every morning hoping his father would return safely from another lonely night. One beautiful Saturday afternoon, Westbridge Medical Center hosted a community celebration recognizing employees and local families. Mason stood proudly beside his father wearing a neatly pressed shirt and holding a framed photograph of his mother. Looking across the smiling crowd, Nolan realized that kindness had a remarkable way of returning when least expected. Every unnoticed sacrifice, every sleepless night, every silent act of compassion had become the foundation for something much greater than personal success. It had inspired an entire community to care more deeply for one another. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to like this video, leave a heartfelt comment about the person who inspires you most. Share this story with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe to Heat Working Dad so more people can discover stories that remind us kindness is never wasted. Special request. In memory of every hard-working parent who sacrifices quietly for their family, please comment, kindness always finds its way, to honor their strength and remind others that even the smallest act of compassion can change a life. Sometimes the greatest heroes never wear expensive suits or stand beneath bright spotlights. Sometimes they push cleaning carts through silent hallways at 3 o'clock in the morning, believing no one notices. Yet every act of kindness leaves a mark somewhere in the world. And when compassion becomes a habit instead of a performance, it has the power to transform families, workplaces, communities, and hearts. Nolan Brooks never worked those lonely nights hoping someone important would see him. He simply wanted to give his son a better tomorrow. In the end, that simple dream became the reason an entire hospital remembered what true humanity looked like, proving that kindness, given in the darkest hours, often shines the brightest when morning finally arrives. The promotion changed Nolan Brooks' job title, but it never changed his heart. Every morning, as the warm daylight filled the windows of Westbridge Medical Center, he walked through the front entrance with the same quiet humility he had carried during countless lonely nights. Employees who once barely noticed him now greeted him with smiles and respect. Yet Nolan refused to let recognition become his purpose. He reminded himself that kindness meant the most when it was offered without expecting anything in return. His new office overlooked the hospital garden, where patients and their families often sat beneath blooming flowers to find a moment of peace. Instead of spending all his time behind a desk, Nolan walked through every department each day, asking patients, visitors, nurses, cleaners, and volunteers if they needed anything. He listened carefully because he knew that sometimes the greatest pain was simply feeling unheard. At home, life became brighter. Mason finally enjoyed evenings with his father. Together, they cooked dinner, completed homework, and laughed over simple board games that had gathered dust for years. Every Sunday afternoon, they visited Hannah's favorite park, carrying fresh flowers to place beneath the old oak tree where she had loved reading books. Those visits were no longer filled only with sadness. They became moments of gratitude, reminding both father and son that love never truly disappears. Several months later, Westbridge Medical Center faced one of its most difficult days. A powerful storm swept across the city, causing widespread accidents and flooding. Ambulances arrived one after another, filling every emergency room bed. Families crowded the waiting areas, frightened and exhausted. Doctors and nurses worked tirelessly, while volunteers rushed to deliver blankets, water, and food. Although Nolan's shift had officially ended, he refused to leave. He remembered the countless nights when people had needed hope more than comfort. He organized waiting areas, comforted anxious children, directed frightened families to the correct departments, and even helped serve meals to exhausted medical staff. His calm presence spread through the hospital like a quiet light. Late that afternoon, Victoria Sterling walked through the emergency department once again. She watched Nolan gently comforting an elderly man whose wife was in surgery. Nolan sat beside him for nearly an hour, listening patiently while the man shared memories of 60 years of marriage. Nolan never looked at the clock. He simply understood that compassion could sometimes heal wounds medicine could not reach. Victoria realized something remarkable. The kindness she had witnessed months earlier had not faded after recognition. Instead, it had grown stronger, inspiring dozens of employees to follow the same example. Nurses comforted frightened children. Security guards carried groceries for elderly visitors. Cafeteria workers quietly prepared free meals for families unable to leave the hospital. The culture of Westbridge had transformed because one ordinary father had shown everyone what extraordinary humanity looked like. That winter, the hospital organized its first Community Kindness Day. Hundreds of local families attended. Free health screenings, children's activities, and volunteer programs filled the hospital grounds. During the ceremony, Victoria invited Mason onto the stage beside his father. With tears in her eyes, she spoke about the little boy who had unknowingly inspired one of the greatest changes in the hospital's history. She explained that every sacrifice Nolan made had always been for his son, and that Mason's own kindness, sharing his lunch with another child, proved compassion could be passed from one generation to the next. The audience rose to their feet in a long-standing ovation. Nolan looked toward the sky for a quiet moment. In his heart, he imagined Hannah smiling. The life they had dreamed of together had taken a different path than expected, but their love had continued through every choice he made and every lesson Mason learned. As the afternoon sun bathed the hospital garden in warm light, Nolan understood that the hardest nights of his life had never been meaningless. Every sacrifice had prepared him to become a light for others. His story reminded everyone that true success is not measured by promotions, titles, or applause. It is measured by the lives we quietly lift when no one is watching. If this story touched your heart, please like this video, share it with your friends and family, leave a comment telling us who inspires you to keep going, and subscribe to Heat Working Dad for more emotional stories filled with hope, kindness, and second chances. Special request, please comment, kindness changes lives, to honor every hardworking parent who quietly sacrifices for their family each day. Sometimes the world changes because of powerful leaders, but more often it changes because one ordinary person refuses to stop being kind. Nolan Brooks proved that even the smallest act of compassion can echo through countless lives, reminding us all that love, sacrifice, and kindness never go unnoticed forever.